It was the time when I finally moved out of my parents' house. I managed to buy an entire house in a quiet neighborhood for a ridiculously good price. The man who sold me the house was strange, his demeanor, the way he spoke, but I shrugged it off. A deal was a deal, and I was thrilled to have a place to call my own. The day I moved in was one of the happiest days of my life. The house was well furnished, cozy, and had everything I could possibly need. Even the appliances, brand new and functional, came with the house practically free. It felt too good to be true, but I didn't question it. I worked from home, so my life was pretty chill. Social interactions weren't my thing. I avoided conversations unless absolutely necessary. For the first 2 weeks, I didn't interact with any of my neighbors. But as the days passed, I started noticing strange things. There was no milkman, no newspaper boy, no kids playing outside, no cars pulling out of driveways. It was eerily quiet. Too quiet. One day, I mustered the courage to knock on my next-door neighbor's door. Standing on their porch, my heart pounded as I knocked. The sound echoed loudly in the silence. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again, but still no answer. Paranoid, I rushed back to my house without looking back. Then came the night that truly unsettled me. I was in the kitchen making late-night coffee when I glanced out the window. The street was pitch black. None of the houses were lit up. It was as though the neighborhood had been swallowed by darkness. My house glowed warmly, the only source of light. Unease curled in my stomach. Was there a power outage? So why was my house unaffected? The silence pressed in, suffocating. It wasn't just quiet, it was unnatural. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing and went to bed, though sleep did not come easily. About a month and a half into my stay, I was scrolling through my phone when an article caught my eye. The neighborhood that vanished overnight. My heart skipped a beat. The story detailed a bizarre event years ago when an entire neighborhood, houses, people, pets, disappeared without a trace. The eerie part? It was the same neighborhood I was living in. According to the article, one day people were there and the next they were gone. Everything was left behind. Furniture, cars, even half-eaten meals. Investigators never found any clues, and the mystery remained unsolved. My blood ran cold. I had been living in that same neighborhood for over a month. Alone. Completely alone. Every quiet night, every empty house, every missing neighbor suddenly made sense. A chill crawled up my spine. How had I not known? I didn't waste any time. I packed my things and left that house as fast as I could. By dawn I was gone. Today it's been 7 years, but the memories still haunt me. In a modest apartment building at the edge of town, Clara lived with her loyal dog, Max, seeking a fresh start after a difficult time. The building was old, with creaky floors and drafty hallways, and Clara's apartment, though small, was cozy. The neighborhood was quiet and the neighbors friendly enough, but Clara preferred solitude. Across from her apartment was another unit, where a family of 3 lived. Clara often noticed their curtains tightly drawn, obscuring the interior, which felt odd. She never thought much of it, though, until one evening when strange things began happening. Max, usually calm, started barking uncontrollably, staring at the window across from theirs. Clara thought it was just random noise at first, but the barking persisted night after night, as if Max were reacting to something she couldn't see. One morning, while sipping coffee, Clara glanced out the window and froze. There, standing at the window of the apartment across from hers, was a small, pale girl. Clara wasn't sure if she'd seen her before, but sometimes the girl would appear, her dark hair framing her face, her small smile soft and comforting. But something felt off. The girl's skin was unnaturally pale, almost as if she hadn't seen the sun in years, and her eyes, those eyes, had a cold, empty emptiness to them. Despite this, Clara found herself drawn to the girl, watching her every morning. Max, too, became agitated whenever the girl was at the window. Over time, Clara began waving at the girl. The girl would always wave back with that same unwavering smile. Though they never spoke, the silent exchange felt oddly intimate. The girl would tap on the window and point to herself, her way of introducing herself. Clara smiled back, thinking the girl might be lonely just as she sometimes felt. One day the girl finally spoke. The next morning, when Clara looked out the window, the girl was there again, gazing directly at her. Clara raised her cup in greeting, and to her surprise, the girl mimicked the gesture. Clara mouthed "Hi," and the girl smiled wider. Then, in a small, delicate voice that only Clara could barely hear through the glass, she whispered, "I stay home alone. My mommy and daddy are always at work." Clara was taken aback. A child left alone in an apartment? But Clara smiled back, feeling a protective warmth for her. It was strange, but maybe the girl simply needed someone to talk to. For the next few weeks, Clara's routine became entwined with the girl's silent company. The girl would stand at the window, her cold eyes staring out as Clara sipped her coffee. They exchanged waves, and Clara often found herself speaking softly to the girl, though she knew the conversation was one-sided. One day Clara decided to do something nice for the girl. She saw a handcrafted doll in a nearby shop, a soft, smiling face that she thought would bring the girl some comfort. Excited, Clara went to the building's lobby to ask the manager about the family in apartment 3B. The manager's expression shifted when she mentioned the family. "There's no one living there," he said, his voice low. "The apartment's been vacant for years." Clara was taken aback. "But I see the little girl always at the window." The manager's face grew serious. "That apartment's been sealed for as long as I've worked here. A family used to live there, a mom, dad, and their daughter. But the little girl died in a fire. The apartment caught on fire one night when the parents weren't home, and she was trapped inside." Clara's stomach twisted. "But the family, they were just there. The little girl," she stopped. The manager's expression grew grimmer. "There hasn't been anyone in that apartment for over 5 years. It was a tragedy. The parents never made it back in time. The fire was caused by an electrical fault." Clara stood frozen, her hand trembling on the door frame. She turned away, feeling as though everything had just crumbled around her. When she returned to her apartment, she saw it. The little girl, she wasn't there. She never came back. Clara was so devastated by the story and creeped out by the interaction, that she decided to leave the apartment. As she couldn't see the same window with a disturbing past, every morning, it was a warm spring evening when the unsettling events began, and at the time, I had no idea how they'd turn my world upside down. I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where everyone knew each other's name, and you could always expect a friendly wave. My neighbors were friendly, but I never felt completely at ease. Then one summer evening, something odd happened. It started with a sound. I had just settled in for the night, a book in hand, when I heard it from across the street, the faintest shuffle. It grew louder, like someone dragging their feet. I leaned back in my chair, straining to hear. It wasn't footsteps, it was something dragging. Curious but not alarmed, I glanced out the window. The street was empty, except for the silhouette of my neighbor's house across the way, bathed in porch light. I dismissed it, assuming it was a stray animal or something innocuous. But the sound didn't stop. It continued for hours, shuffling, dragging, until I finally decided to investigate. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but something felt off. I put on my shoes and stepped outside into the warm night air, thick with the scent of jasmine. But there was an odd chill, an unsettling quiet that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I crossed the street, careful to stay in the shadows. When I reached my neighbor's driveway, I froze. There, under the glow of the porch light, was a figure. It was crouched low, dragging something behind it. The dragging noise stopped for a moment, and I took a step forward, but then, without warning, the figure turned. A man. Or at least what used to be a man. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and wide, with hollow sockets staring through me. His skin was pale and his clothes torn as if he'd been walking for days. But the most disturbing part? His arms were impossibly long, reaching the ground as he dragged a large twitching bag. I didn't know whether to run or scream, but my feet were frozen. The figure didn't acknowledge me. He simply turned, dragging the bag toward his garage as if this was a normal evening task. The dragging sound echoed in the silence. My heart pounded as I stood in the shadows, too scared to move. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually the figure disappeared behind the garage, and everything went eerily quiet again. I couldn't make sense of what I'd seen. Was it a person in distress? A hallucination? The feeling that something was terribly wrong lingered. The next day my neighbor's house was unnervingly quiet. That night the dragging sound returned. Softer than before but unmistakable. This time I stayed inside, watching through the blinds as the figure made his rounds in the dark. I tried to ask other neighbors if they'd noticed anything strange, but they all assured me I was imagining things. They'd seen nothing. But I knew what I had seen. A few weeks later, the family next door moved out. A new family moved in. They seemed normal, until one night I saw the father standing in his driveway, staring at the moon with that same hollow-eyed look. His arms were strangely long, and I could hear the faint dragging sound behind him as he went inside. It was then I realized the neighborhood had changed. Something darker was taking root. Something was wrong, and I had no idea how deep it went. All I knew was that the figure I saw wasn't the only one. And sometimes when the night is still, I hear that faint dragging sound from the street again, wondering if I'll ever truly know who, or what, lives among us.